Juliet's alarm pierced through the 6:15 a.m. darkness like it did every weekday morning. She reached over, silenced it, and sat up with the kind of mechanical precision that comes from years of corporate discipline. Today wasn't just another day. Today was the day she'd been preparing for all week, the quarterly review meeting where her promotion would finally be discussed. 3 years of flawless performance, of early arrivals and late departures, of swallowed pride and executed perfection. 3 years that were supposed to culminate in this single morning. She moved through her apartment with practiced efficiency. The coffee maker gurgled to life while she stepped into the shower. By 6:45, she was dressed in her navy blazer and pressed white shirt, the outfit she'd chosen specifically because it projected confidence without arrogance. By 7:10, she was out the door, her leather bag tucked under her arm, her mind already rehearsing the talking points she'd prepared for the meeting. The morning air was crisp, tinged with that particular autumn coolness that made everything feel sharper, more alive. Juliet walked briskly toward the bus stop, her heels clicking against the sidewalk in a steady rhythm. The streets were beginning to fill with the usual morning chaos. Cars honking, people rushing, the city waking up to chase its daily bread. That's when she saw him. At first, it was just a crumpled shape on the sidewalk about 50 feet ahead. Her brain tried to categorize it, a bag of trash maybe, or discarded clothing. But as she got closer, the shape became horrifyingly clear. A boy, no older than 12, lay motionless on the concrete. His bicycle was twisted beside him, the front wheel still spinning slowly. A small pool of blood was forming beneath his head. Juliet's heart slammed against her ribcage. She looked around frantically. The street was busy, but everyone was in their own bubble. Earbuds in, eyes on phones, minds already at their destinations. No one had stopped. No one had even noticed. She checked her watch. 7:18 a.m. The meeting started at 8:30. She needed to be there by 8:15 at the absolute latest to review her notes, to center herself, to be ready. The boy's chest rose and fell, barely, but it moved. He was alive. Juliet dropped to her knees beside him, her bag hitting the ground. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The operator's voice came through, calm and procedural, asking questions Juliet struggled to answer because her own voice kept breaking. "There's a boy. He's unconscious. He fell off his bike, I think. There's blood. His head is bleeding. Please, you need to send someone right now." The operator asked for the location. Juliet looked up at the street signs, rattled off the intersection, answered more questions. Was he breathing? Yes. Was he responsive? No. Had anyone witnessed what happened? She didn't know. She'd just found him. A small crowd began to form, that peculiar human instinct to gather around tragedy once someone else has already done the hard part of stopping. A woman asked if she should call 911. Juliet told her it was already done. A man in a jogging suit stood with his hands on his hips, shaking his head, offering nothing but his presence. "The ambulance is 7 minutes away," the operator said. "Stay with him, keep him still, don't move his head or neck." 7 minutes. Juliet looked at her watch again. 7:23 a.m. She could wait for the ambulance to arrive and still make it to work, she calculated frantically. If they got here in 7 minutes, if she could flag down a cab immediately after, if traffic cooperated, if everything aligned perfectly, she might still make it in time. She'd be flustered, maybe a little late, but she could explain. She could make them understand. But as she knelt there, watching the boy's pale face, watching the weak rise and fall of his small chest, she knew she couldn't leave him alone with strangers. He was a child. He was someone's son. What if he woke up terrified? What if something went wrong before the ambulance arrived? The 7 minutes felt like 70. The ambulance finally screamed around the corner, lights flashing, and 2 paramedics jumped out with practiced urgency. They asked Juliet rapid-fire questions while they worked. Was she a witness? Did she see what happened? Did she know the boy? "I just found him like this," she said. "I don't know him. I don't know what happened." One paramedic stabilized the boy's neck while the other checked his vitals and examined the wound. They were efficient, focused, speaking to each other in medical shorthand that Juliet couldn't follow. "We need to transport him immediately," one of them said, looking up at Juliet. "Did anyone contact his parents?" The crowd murmured uncertainly. No one knew who he was. His backpack was nearby, thrown clear from the impact. One of the paramedics rifled through it quickly, found a phone, but it was password locked. "Someone needs to come with us to the hospital until we can reach his family," the paramedic said, looking directly at Juliet. "Can you do that?" She looked at her watch. 7:41 a.m. Every fiber of her ambition screamed at her to say no, to explain that she had somewhere critically important to be, that this was the day that would define her entire career trajectory, that 3 years of sacrifice couldn't be derailed by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But when she looked down at the boy's face, his skin so pale it was almost translucent, a smear of blood in his light brown hair, she heard herself say, "Yes, I'll come." They loaded him into the ambulance. Juliet climbed in after him, sitting on the small side bench while the paramedics worked. The doors slammed shut and the siren wailed to life. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. 7:44 a.m. She called her office. It rang 4 times before going to the general voicemail. She tried her supervisor's direct line. Voicemail. She tried the main desk. Finally, someone answered. Rebecca from accounting. "Rebecca, it's Juliet. I need you to find Mr. Hendricks right now and tell him I'm going to be late. There's been an emergency." "He's in back-to-back meetings all morning, Juliet. The review meeting is about to start." "I know, but please, just tell him I'll be there as soon as I possibly can. A child was hurt, I had to." "I'll leave him a message," Rebecca said, her tone suggesting she didn't really believe the urgency. "But you know how he is about the quarterly reviews." The line went dead. Juliet stared at her phone, then at the boy, then at the paramedics working to keep him stable. She'd made her choice. She just had to hope it wouldn't destroy everything she'd built. The hospital was chaos. Bright lights, rushing staff, the smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner. They wheeled the boy away immediately, and Juliet found herself standing alone in the emergency waiting area, still clutching her bag, her carefully chosen blazer now wrinkled and smudged with dirt from the sidewalk. She called the office again. 8:33 a.m. The meeting had started. This time, Mr. Hendricks himself answered his direct line. "Where are you?" His voice was ice. "Mr. Hendricks, I'm so sorry. I was on my way to work and I found a child unconscious on the street. He'd fallen off his bike and hit his head. I had to call 911 and stay with him. He's at the hospital now and—" "Do you know what today is, Juliet?" "Yes, sir, I know, and I'll be there within the hour, I promise. We've been waiting for you for 30 minutes. 30 minutes of my time, the regional director's time, and the entire senior team's time. Do you have any idea what that costs this company? I understand and I take full responsibility, but this was literally a life or death situation. I don't want to hear excuses. I want to hear that you're in this building in the next 10 minutes, or I want to hear nothing from you ever again." The line went dead. Juliet stood there, phone pressed to her ear, the dial tone buzzing. Around her, the hospital continued its frenetic pace. Nurses calling out codes, machines beeping, families crying and embracing and arguing. She couldn't make it in 10 minutes. Even if she ran outside right now and found a cab immediately, it would take at least 25 minutes in morning traffic. Her phone rang. Mr. Hendricks again. "You're not here," he said when she answered. "Clean out your desk by end of day tomorrow. You're done." "Mr. Hendricks, please, if you'll just listen." "I've listened enough. 3 years of adequate performance doesn't give you the right to sabotage the most important meeting of the quarter. We need people we can count on, Juliet. Clearly, you're not one of them. I saved a child's life today." The words burst out of her, sharp and desperate. A 12-year-old boy was dying on the sidewalk and nobody else stopped. Nobody. What was I supposed to do? "You were supposed to do your job." His voice was flat, final. "Human Resources will contact you about your final paycheck and benefits termination." The call ended. Juliet stood in the middle of the emergency waiting room, her phone still raised to her ear, while the impossible reality crashed over her. 3 years. 3 years of early mornings and late nights. 3 years of missed birthdays and skipped vacations. 3 years of building a career, a future, a life. Gone in a single phone call, because she'd stopped to save a child's life. The hospital released her after 2 hours once the boy's emergency contact information was finally retrieved from his school, and his father was notified. Juliet walked out into the midday sun feeling hollowed out, like someone had reached inside her chest and scooped out everything vital. She didn't go back to the office. What was the point? Mr. Hendricks had made himself crystal clear. She went home instead, to her small studio apartment with its view of a brick wall and the persistent drip in the bathroom sink she'd been meaning to report for months. She sat on her couch, still wearing her navy blazer, and stared at the wall until the sunlight shifted and the room fell into shadow. Her phone buzzed with messages. Her co-worker Sarah. What happened? Everyone's talking about it. Another from Tom in IT. Heard you got canned. That's brutal, man. And finally, one from Rebecca in accounting. Security escorted someone to pack your desk. Your stuff will be in boxes at reception tomorrow. They hadn't even given her the dignity of clearing out her own workspace. That night, Juliet didn't sleep. She lay in bed running calculations in her head, the kind of brutal mathematics that comes when financial security dissolves overnight. Rent was due in 18 days. She had maybe $2,000 in savings, enough for 1 month's rent and utilities, but nothing beyond that. Her student loans would come due in 30 days. Her car payment in 23. The health insurance she'd had through work would terminate at the end of the month, and the prescription medication she took for anxiety would jump from a $15 copay to nearly $300 out of pocket. The walls seemed to close in as the numbers spiraled. She got up at dawn and opened her laptop. By noon, she'd applied to 47 jobs, everything remotely related to her field, and several that weren't. Marketing coordinator positions, administrative assistant roles, customer service representatives, even a receptionist job at a dental office that paid $12 an hour. She rewrote her cover letter so many times the words started to blur together into meaningless corporate poetry about being a motivated self-starter and a team player with strong communication skills. The first rejection email arrived within 3 hours, then another, then silence. Days turned into a week. Juliet's routine became a grim cycle of waking up, checking her email for responses that rarely came, applying to more jobs, and conducting phone screens that went nowhere. The few interviews she did land seemed promising until they asked about her previous position. The money drained away faster than she'd calculated. Her landlord called about renewing her lease. It was up in 6 weeks, and he needed an answer. She asked for an extension to decide. He gave her 1 week. The electric bill came, higher than usual because she'd been home all day every day. Her car insurance came due. She paid it and watched her checking account drop below $400. She started skipping meals, not dramatically, just breakfast usually and sometimes lunch. She told herself it was fine. She'd been meaning to lose a few pounds anyway. But the truth was simpler and more humiliating. She couldn't afford to eat 3 times a day anymore. Her mother called. Juliet almost didn't answer, but guilt won out. "Sweetheart, I haven't heard from you in 2 weeks. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Mom. Just busy with work." "That's good, honey. Your father and I are so proud of you. Making it in the big city, climbing that corporate ladder. We were just telling the neighbors about your upcoming promotion." Juliet closed her eyes. She hadn't told them. Couldn't tell them. Her parents had worried so much when she'd moved away, had warned her about how hard it would be, how competitive, how easy it was to fail. She'd promised them she could make it. She'd spent 3 years proving she could make it. "Thanks, Mom. Listen, I have to go. Oh, before you do, Dad wanted to ask if you needed any help with your student loans. I know they're not small, and if things are tight..." "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "No, I'm fine. I can handle it. I have to go. Love you." She hung up before her mother could press further. before the concern in her voice could crack Juliet's already crumbling composure. 3 weeks after her termination, Juliet received an email from Hendricks and Morrison's HR department. It was coldly professional, outlining her final paycheck amount, which included no severance, as she'd been terminated for cause, and instructions for Cobra health insurance continuation, which would cost her $647 per month. She laughed when she read that number. Actually laughed. A sharp, hysterical sound in the empty apartment. $647 a month for insurance when she couldn't afford to eat regularly. The rejection emails kept coming, when companies bothered to send them at all. Most just ghosted her. Her inbox became a graveyard of automated responses. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Your qualifications were impressive, but we've found someone who better fits our needs. We'll keep your resume on file for future opportunities. Future opportunities. What a beautiful way to say never. Juliet started applying to jobs she was overqualified for. Barista positions, warehouse work, data entry roles that paid barely above minimum wage. Even those came back with rejections or silence. The market was flooded with candidates. Everyone was desperate. She was just another voice in a screaming crowd. 5 weeks after her termination, her landlord called again. Juliet, I need your decision on the lease renewal. I've got 3 people interested in viewing the apartment. I need to break the lease, she said quietly. I'm going to move out. There was a pause. Your lease runs through the end of next month. Breaking it early will cost you 2 months' rent as penalty. I don't have 2 months' rent. Another pause, longer this time. Then I'll need you out by the lease end date, and I'll have to keep your security deposit to cover what you owe. She wanted to argue, to explain, to beg. But what was the point? I understand. After he hung up, Juliet sat on her couch and looked around her apartment. This space she'd been so proud of when she first moved in. This symbol of her independence and success. In 4 weeks, she'd have to leave it. She'd have to pack everything she owned into her decade-old sedan and drive back home. Back to her parents' house. Back to the town she'd worked so hard to escape. Back to the life she'd sworn she'd outgrown. That night, lying in bed with the streetlight casting shadows across her ceiling, Juliet thought about the boy. She didn't even know his name. Didn't know if he'd recovered, if he was okay. If he even remembered the woman who'd stayed with him while his blood pooled on the sidewalk. She'd sacrificed everything to save him, and she didn't even know if it had mattered. The thought that kept her awake until dawn was simpler, more brutal. If she could go back to that morning knowing everything that would happen, would she make the same choice? She wanted to believe she would. She desperately wanted to believe that saving a child's life was worth losing her own. But lying there in the dark, broke and unemployed and facing homelessness, with hunger a constant ache in her belly and fear a constant weight in her chest, she honestly didn't know anymore. And that uncertainty scared her more than anything else. With 3 days left before her lease expired, Juliet made a decision. Before she packed her life into boxes and drove away in defeat, she needed to know. She needed to see if that boy, the child who'd cost her everything, had at least survived. If her sacrifice had actually meant something. She drove to the hospital on a gray Wednesday morning, the kind of day where the sky looked like it couldn't decide whether to rain or just hang there heavy and oppressive. She parked in the visitor lot and sat in her car for 10 minutes, trying to gather courage she didn't really feel anymore. Inside, the hospital smelled exactly as she remembered. That particular combination of antiseptic, floor cleaner, and something underneath it all that might have been fear or might have been hope. She approached the information desk where a woman with reading glasses on a chain looked up expectantly. I'm trying to find information about a patient who was brought in about 5 weeks ago, Juliet said. A boy, maybe 12 years old, bicycle accident, head injury. I was the one who called 911 and came in the ambulance with him. The woman's fingers moved across her keyboard. Do you have a name? No, I never learned it. It was October 8th, around 7:30 in the morning. More typing. The woman's eyes scanned her screen and then something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or remembered drama. Oh, yes. I'll need to call up to the floor. One moment. She picked up her phone and had a brief, quiet conversation that Juliet couldn't quite hear. When she hung up, she wrote something on a post-it note and slid it across the counter. 4th floor, room 4 on 12. They said you can go up. The elevator ride felt eternal. Juliet watched the numbers climb, 2, 3, 4, and wondered what she'd find. Would the boy even remember her? Would his parents be grateful or resentful that a stranger had inserted herself into their crisis? Room 412 was at the end of a long hallway. The door was partially open, and through it Juliet could hear voices, a child's laugh, bright and clear, and a deeper voice responding with warmth. She knocked softly. "Come in," the deeper voice called. Juliet pushed the door open and stepped inside. The boy was sitting up in bed, looking nothing like the pale, bleeding child she'd found on the sidewalk. His color was back, his eyes were bright, and he was holding what looked like a handheld gaming device. Next to the bed sat a man in his late 30s, dressed in dark jeans and a gray sweater, his hair slightly disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. The boy looked up when she entered, his expression curious but not recognizing. The man stood immediately, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, then dawning realization. "You're her," he said. "You're the woman who found him." Juliet nodded, suddenly feeling intrusive. "I'm sorry to just show up like this, I wanted to see if he was okay. I've been wondering." "Are you kidding?" The man crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hand in both of his grip warm and firm. "Do you have any idea? We've been trying to find you. The hospital wouldn't give us your information, privacy laws or whatever, but I've been asking everyone, trying to track you down so I could thank you properly." "It's really not necessary. You saved my son's life." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. The doctor said if he'd been lying there even 5 more minutes without help, the bleeding in his brain would have been catastrophic. "You didn't just find him. You saved him." Juliet felt something hot and tight in her throat. She looked at the boy, who was watching this exchange with wide eyes. "Do you remember me?" she asked him gently. He shook his head. "Not really. I remember riding my bike to school, and then I remember waking up here. Everything in between is just gone." "You hit a pothole," his father explained, moving back to sit on the edge of the bed. "Went over your handlebars and landed on your head. Fractured your skull. Had to have emergency surgery to relieve the pressure." He looked back at Juliet, his eyes shining. "The surgeon told me that the person who called 911 and stayed with him probably added 10 years to my life by shaving 10 years off from stress. I'm Marcus, by the way, Marcus Thorne. And this is my son, David." "Juliet," she said, managing a small smile. "Juliet Chen. I'm glad you're okay, David. Really glad." Marcus gestured to the chair beside the bed. "Please sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? The cafeteria coffee is terrible, but there's a decent cafe on the 1st floor." "No, thank you, I'm fine." Juliet sat, feeling the exhaustion of the past week settling into her bones. "I just wanted to check on him before I left town." Something in her voice must have betrayed her, because Marcus's expression shifted from gratitude to concern. "Leaving town? Are you moving?" And there it was. The question she didn't want to answer. The reality she didn't want to speak out loud. But sitting there in that hospital room with this man looking at her with such genuine kindness, with his son alive and laughing when he could have been dead, something in Juliet just broke. "I'm going back home," she said quietly. "Back to my parents' place. My lease is up in 3 days and I can't afford to renew it." Marcus frowned. "But you live here? You have a job here?" "Had a job." The words tasted bitter. "I was fired. The day I found David, actually. I was on my way to an important meeting, a quarterly review where my promotion was going to be discussed. I'd been preparing for weeks. But when I found David and had to go to the hospital with him, I missed the meeting. My supervisor fired me over the phone while I was sitting in the emergency waiting room." The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus stared at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, horror, and something that looked like rage. "You're telling me," he said slowly, each word careful and controlled. That you were fired for saving my son's life? Juliet shrugged, trying for casual and landing somewhere near defeated. I was late to an important meeting. From a corporate perspective, I understand the decision. Time is money, and I wasted a lot of people's time that morning. That's insane. Marcus stood up, started pacing. That's beyond insane. What kind of company, what kind of person, fires someone for helping a dying child? The kind who values punctuality over empathy, I guess. Juliet looked down at her hands. I've been job hunting ever since, but nothing's panned out. I've applied to over 200 positions in 5 weeks. The few interviews I've gotten all end the same way. Once they find out I was terminated, they lose interest. And I can't exactly hide it because if they call my previous employer for a reference... She trailed off, the futility of it all pressing down on her chest. Where was this? What company? Juliet hesitated. She'd spent 5 weeks trying not to badmouth Hendricks and Morrison, knowing that burning bridges in a professional world could be career suicide. But what career? What bridges? She had nothing left to lose. Hendricks and Morrison, she said. I was in their marketing department. Marcus stopped pacing. He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her uneasy. Say that again, he said quietly. Hendricks and Morrison. It's a corporate consulting firm downtown. I know what it is. Marcus's voice had gone very still, very controlled. Juliet, what was your supervisor's name? Richard Hendricks. He's the regional director. Why? Because I own that company. The words hung in the air like a physical thing. Juliet felt them impact her consciousness, but couldn't quite process their meaning. She stared at Marcus, waiting for the punchline, the clarification, the explanation that would make this make sense. I'm sorry, she said slowly. You own... Hendricks and Morrison. I'm Morrison. Marcus Morrison Thorne. But I dropped the Morrison from my daily name after the divorce. It was my ex-wife's family name, and keeping it professionally just made sense for continuity. Richard Hendricks is my business partner and manages the Eastern Regional operations. He ran a hand through his hair, and Juliet suddenly understood why it looked so disheveled. I've been out of the office for 5 weeks taking care of David. Had to postpone every meeting, delegate everything. Richard's been handling the day-to-day. Juliet couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, too bright, too impossible. You're telling me, she said, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears, that the company I was fired from is yours? Apparently. Marcus pulled out his phone, his jaw tight. And I'm telling you that whoever made that decision is going to deeply regret it. No. The word came out sharper than Juliet intended. No, please don't. I don't want to cause problems. I don't want anyone else to lose their job because of me. Juliet. Marcus looked at her directly, and there was something fierce in his eyes. You lost your entire livelihood because you saved my son's life. You've spent 5 weeks looking for work, burning through your savings, facing homelessness, all because you did the right thing. And the person who made that happen works for me, in my company, representing my values. He shook his head. That's not causing problems. That's fixing one. David, who'd been quiet through this whole exchange, spoke up from the bed. Dad's right, you helped me and they fired you. That's really messed up. Despite everything, Juliet almost laughed. Your son has good instincts. He gets it from his mother, Marcus said, but he was smiling slightly. Then the smile faded, replaced by something more serious. Juliet, I can't undo what happened to you. I can't give you back 5 weeks of your life or erase what you went through. But I can do something. Will you let me? She wanted to say no, wanted to maintain some dignity, some independence. But the truth was simple and unavoidable. She was 3 days away from homelessness. She had $214 in her checking account, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. What did you have in mind? She asked quietly. Marcus sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. First, I want you to tell me exactly what you did at Hendricks and Morrison. What were your responsibilities? What were you good at? So she told him. About the marketing campaign she'd designed, the client relationships she'd built, the projects she'd led, about her ideas for digital expansion that had been consistently shot down by Richard Hendricks, who preferred traditional approaches, about the presentation she'd been preparing for that fatal morning, the one outlining a complete social media overhaul that could have increased their client engagement by 40%. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking questions, his expression growing more thoughtful with each answer. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I have a position," he said. "Director of Digital Strategy. It's new. I've been trying to modernize our approach for 2 years, but Richard's been resistant. The position would report directly to me, not through regional management. You'd have autonomy to implement your vision, budget to hire a small team, and a salary of $95,000 plus benefits." Juliet's mouth went dry. $95,000 was more than she'd been making, significantly more. "I can't accept that," she said automatically. "Why not?" "Because it feels like charity. Like you're only offering it because of what happened with David." "You're partially right," Marcus admitted. "I am offering it because of David, but not because I feel guilty or obligated. I'm offering it because in our 30-minute conversation, you've demonstrated more strategic thinking and innovation than I've seen from my marketing department in 6 months. I'm offering it because I've been trying to find someone who understands digital engagement and modern consumer behavior. And here you are. I'm offering it because you're clearly qualified, clearly passionate, and clearly need a break that you more than deserve." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "But if that doesn't convince you, I'm also offering it because I'm a businessman, and good business means hiring talented people when you find them. This isn't charity, Juliet. This is me recognizing an opportunity when it literally shows up at my son's hospital door." Juliet looked at David, who gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up. She looked at Marcus, whose expression was open and honest and somehow made her want to cry. She looked at the future she'd been facing, the drive home in defeat, the explanations to her parents, the years of rebuilding from zero, and then at the future he was offering. "When would I start?" she heard herself ask. Marcus smiled. "How's Monday sound?" Marcus insisted on walking Juliet down to the hospital cafe, claiming he needed decent coffee after days of surviving on the vending machine sludge near David's floor. But as they sat across from each other at a small corner table, she realized he had another agenda entirely. "I need to understand exactly what happened," he said, pulling out his phone and opening what looked like a notes app. "Walk me through that day, every detail." So she did. The quarterly review meeting, her preparation, finding David, the 911 call, the ambulance ride, and then Richard Hendricks' phone calls, both of them. The ice in his voice, the absolute refusal to listen, the termination delivered while she stood in an emergency room, still wearing the blazer she'd chosen so carefully that morning. Marcus's jaw tightened as she spoke, a muscle jumping near his temple. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at his phone screen. "Richard and I started this company 12 years ago," he finally said. "We had different strengths. I was the visionary, he was the operator. I handled growth and strategy, he handled logistics and management. It worked because we balanced each other." He looked up at her. "But over the years I've watched him become harder, more rigid. He started seeing employees as resources to be optimized rather than people to be developed. I've pushed back, tried to maintain our culture, but I've been less involved in day-to-day operations, especially the regional offices." He set his phone down with deliberate care. "I can't have someone running my company who would do this, who would fire an employee for saving a child's life without even attempting to understand the situation. That's not just bad judgment. That's a fundamental lack of humanity." "Marcus, please," Juliet started, but he held up a hand. "This isn't about revenge, Juliet. This is about values. If I let this stand, what message does that send to every other employee? That we value punctuality over morality? That we'd rather someone step over a dying child than be late to a meeting?" He shook his head firmly. No, that's not the company I built. And it's not the company I'm going to run. He picked up his phone and made a call. Juliet watched his face as he spoke, brief and professional. Karen, it's Marcus. I need you to schedule an emergency board meeting for Friday morning. Yes, I know I'm supposed to be on leave. This can't wait. Send the calendar invite to everyone, including Richard. Thanks. When he hung up, he looked at Juliet with something like apology in his eyes. I know you didn't want this to be a big thing, but it needs to be. Not for you, for everyone else who works there. They need to know that doing the right thing won't destroy their lives. Over the next 2 days, Juliet existed in a strange liminal space between her old life and whatever was coming next. She packed her apartment in a daze, but instead of the defeated surrender she'd been anticipating, it felt more like preparation for something new. Marcus had already arranged for HR to process her hiring paperwork remotely, and her new employee benefits packet arrived via email Thursday evening. She stared at the salary figure, $95,000, until the numbers stopped looking real. Friday morning, Marcus called her at 9:30. It's done, he said without preamble. What's done? Richard Hendricks is no longer with the company, effective immediately. The board unanimously agreed that his actions violated our core values and demonstrated a fundamental misalignment with our mission. He'll receive his contractual severance, but his operational authority has been terminated. Juliet sat down heavily on her half-packed couch. You actually fired him. I actually fired him. There was no satisfaction in Marcus's voice, just firm resolution. And before you protest again, you should know that when I presented the situation to the board, 3 other directors shared similar stories about Richard's management style. Nothing quite this egregious, but a pattern of rigid, unempathetic decision-making that had been creating problems for months. You weren't the catalyst, Juliet. You were the final straw. He paused, and she heard paper rustling. His position, Regional Director of Operations, is now vacant. I'm not offering it to you, he added quickly, apparently anticipating her objection. You're going to be brilliant as Director of Digital Strategy, and that's where I need you. But I wanted you to know that your old position, the one you were supposed to be promoted into, consider it automatically approved. You'll start at the director level, which comes with additional benefits and equity options we can discuss later. After they hung up, Juliet sat in her partially dismantled apartment and cried. Not from sadness or relief exactly, but from the sheer whiplash of how completely her life had transformed in less than a week. She'd walked into that hospital room expecting closure, a final confirmation that her sacrifice had mattered before she slunk home in defeat. Instead, she'd found vindication, opportunity, and something else she couldn't quite name yet. Monday morning, Juliet walked into Hendricks & Morrison, now just Morrison Consulting Group, Marcus had informed her over the weekend, wearing a new blazer she'd splurged on with her signing bonus. The receptionist recognized her and did a visible double-take. Juliet, I thought we heard. I'm back, Juliet said simply. Director of Digital Strategy. I think I'm on the 5th floor now. The receptionist's shock gave way to a genuine smile. 5th floor, corner office. Welcome back. The whispers started immediately. Juliet could feel eyes following her as she walked through the building, could sense the frantic instant messages being sent. She's back. Chen is back, in management. What the hell happened? Marcus met her at her new office, which was, in fact, a corner office with windows overlooking the city. He'd clearly been waiting for her. I wanted to be here for your first day back, he said, to make sure everyone understands that you have my full support and authority. Also, I'm giving a company-wide address at 10 o'clock. I'd like you there. The all-hands meeting was held in the main conference room, packed with employees from every department. Juliet stood near the back, trying to be invisible, but Marcus spotted her and gestured for her to join him at the front. She reluctantly complied, intensely aware of every eye in the room tracking her movement. Marcus's address was brief but powerful. He explained, without using names, that an employee had been wrongfully terminated for rendering emergency medical aid to an injured child. He acknowledged that this had happened under his watch and represented a failure of leadership and values. He announced organizational changes designed to ensure it never happened again, including a new policy protecting employees who stopped to help in emergency situations. "We're a consulting firm," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "We advise other companies on how to build better cultures, more effective teams, more ethical operations. We can't do that credibly if we don't embody those values ourselves. Moving forward, we will prioritize humanity over convenience, people over punctuality, and doing what's right over doing what's easy." The applause was immediate and genuine, and when Marcus introduced Juliet as the new director of digital strategy, asking the room to support her vision and leadership, the applause continued. Some of her former colleagues looked stunned, others looked pleased. Sarah, from her old department, was openly crying. The first few weeks were a blur of activity. Juliet threw herself into her new role with the fervor of someone who'd been given an unexpected second chance. She conducted audits of the company's digital presence, interviewed employees about their online engagement frustrations, and drafted a comprehensive 18-month strategy for modernization. Marcus gave her remarkable autonomy, checking in regularly, but never micromanaging, trusting her expertise and instincts. They fell into an easy working relationship. Weekly strategy meetings that often ran long because they'd get caught up in excited discussions about emerging technologies and consumer behavior trends. Occasional coffee breaks where they'd decompress and talk about things that had nothing to do with work. David's recovery and return to school, Juliet's search for a new apartment, Marcus's navigation of co-parenting with his ex-wife. It was during one of these coffee breaks, about 2 months into her tenure, that Juliet realized something had shifted between them. They were discussing a client pitch over lattes in the building cafe when Marcus laughed at something she said. Really laughed, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and she felt her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. She tried to ignore it. He was her boss. More than that, he was the owner of the company. Getting involved would be complicated at best, catastrophically unprofessional at worst. So she buried the feeling and focused on her work. But the feeling didn't stay buried. She noticed things. The way Marcus lit up when she walked into a room. How he'd sometimes lose track of what he was saying mid-sentence when she smiled at him. The way his hand would linger just a moment too long when he handed her documents. Small things, easily dismissed as imagination or wishful thinking, until the Christmas party. Morrison Consulting Group's holiday celebration was held at an upscale hotel downtown. Juliet had debated not going, office parties always felt awkward, but Sarah had insisted, and somehow Juliet found herself in a navy cocktail dress holding a glass of wine, making small talk with colleagues who now treated her with a mix of respect and curiosity. Marcus arrived late, still in his suit from a client meeting. He made the rounds professionally, thanking employees for their hard work, but Juliet noticed his eyes kept finding her across the room. Around 9 o'clock, he appeared at her elbow. "Want to get some air? It's stuffy in here." They ended up on the hotel's rooftop terrace, the city lights spread out below them like scattered diamonds. December in the city was cold, and Juliet shivered in her thin dress. Without a word, Marcus shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, pulling it close. It smelled like him, cedar and something clean she couldn't identify. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Marcus said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that your job isn't contingent on how you respond. Your position is secure regardless. I need you to believe that before I say anything else." Juliet's heart started hammering. "Okay. I can't stop thinking about you." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back for a long time. "I know the circumstances of how we met were awful, and I know the power dynamic here is complicated, but Juliet, you're the most remarkable person I've ever met. Your compassion, your resilience, your brilliant mind, the way you rebuilt yourself after everything fell apart, the way you throw yourself into every challenge like you're afraid to waste a single second." He turned to face her fully. "I'm falling for you. I might have already fallen, and I needed you to know, even if it complicates everything." Juliet stared at him, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Every professional instinct screamed at her to step back, to thank him politely and change the subject, to protect the career she'd only just rebuilt. But standing there on that rooftop wrapped in his jacket, looking at the vulnerability in his eyes, she realized something crucial. She'd been protecting herself for months from a feeling that had been growing since that first conversation in David's hospital room. "I think about you constantly," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tell myself it's inappropriate, that I should focus on work, that this could ruin everything I've fought to rebuild. But Marcus, when I'm with you, I feel like I can breathe for the first time since that morning on the sidewalk. Like maybe everything that happened, all of it, was leading to something better than I'd ever planned for myself." He closed the distance between them slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. When his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, she leaned into the touch like she'd been starving for it. "We should probably establish some ground rules," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "HR policies, professional boundaries." "Later," Juliet interrupted. "We can figure out all of that later. Right now, I just want—" He kissed her before she could finish the sentence. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was still afraid she might change her mind. But when she kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt to pull him closer, the gentleness gave way to something deeper, more urgent. Years of discipline and control melting away in the winter cold. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "We're really doing this?" "We're really doing this," Juliet confirmed. "Though we should probably head back inside before someone notices we've been gone for 20 minutes and starts a rumor mill." He laughed, the sound warm and free. "Juliet, I'm pretty sure the rumor mill has been working overtime since your first day back. Half the office thinks I hired you because I'm secretly in love with you." "Are they wrong?" "Not even a little bit." They returned to the party separately, maintaining professional distance, but Juliet caught Sarah's knowing smirk from across the room. So much for subtlety. The next morning, Marcus scheduled a meeting with HR. They sat together, professionally, appropriately spaced, and disclosed their relationship to Karen Winters, the head of human resources. Karen listened without expression, took notes, and then pulled out a binder. "We have policies for this," she said matteringly. "Executive relationships aren't prohibited, but they require disclosure, which you've done. Juliet, you report directly to Marcus, which creates a potential conflict. We'll need to adjust the reporting structure. You'll report to the COO for performance reviews and compensation decisions. Marcus can still oversee your strategic direction, but he won't have unilateral authority over your employment status." "That's more than fair," Juliet said quickly. Karen nodded. "I'll also need you both to sign acknowledgement forms stating that the relationship is consensual and that you understand the professional boundaries required. Any concerns from either party need to be reported immediately." She looked at them over her reading glasses. "I'm trusting you both to handle this maturely and not let it impact the workplace culture." "You have my word," Marcus said. Over the following months, they navigated their relationship with careful intentionality. At work, they maintained professional boundaries, no public displays of affection, no special treatment, no closed-door meetings without legitimate business reasons. Juliet made sure to document every decision, every project milestone, creating a paper trail that would prove her advancement was merit-based. But outside the office, they built something real. Marcus introduced her to David officially as someone important to me, and the 12-year-old had grinned and said, "I know, Dad, you're not subtle." They had dinners at quiet restaurants, took walks through the city, spent weekends at Marcus's house where Juliet taught David how to beat his father at card games. She met his ex-wife, Claire, at a school event for David. The meeting had terrified Juliet, but Claire had been gracious and kind. "He's been different since he met you," Claire told her quietly, while Marcus and David were getting snacks. "Lighter. He's been carrying so much guilt about the divorce, about not being present enough for David, but you've helped him remember how to be happy." She smiled. "Anyone who loves my son the way you do is okay in my book." Juliet's parents visited in the spring, and she'd been anxious about introducing them to Marcus. worried they'd see the relationship as impulsive or judge the power dynamic. But her mother had taken one look at how Marcus looked at her daughter and pulled Juliet aside. "That man adores you," she'd whispered. "And sweetheart, you're glowing. I haven't seen you this happy since you were a little girl." At work, Juliet's digital strategy was transforming the company. Her team had grown to 8 people, and their campaigns had increased client engagement by 63% in 6 months. She'd been featured in 2 industry publications and asked to speak at a marketing conference in Chicago. The professional success was intoxicating, made even sweeter because she'd earned every bit of it. One evening in late June, almost exactly 8 months after that Christmas party kiss, Marcus asked her to dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. Juliet noticed he was nervous, fidgeting with his napkin, ordering wine he barely touched, talking faster than usual. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. "You're acting weird." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Because I'm about to do something that might be too fast, might be too soon. But I can't wait anymore because every day I don't ask feels like a wasted opportunity." Juliet's heart started racing. "Marcus." He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between them. He didn't open it yet, just looked at her with those intense eyes that had first caught her attention in a hospital room. "9 months ago, my son almost died and you saved his life," he said quietly. "You sacrificed everything to help a stranger, and that sacrifice brought you into my life. I know people will say it's too fast. I know they'll have opinions about how we met, about the circumstances, about the power dynamic. But Juliet, I have never been more certain of anything than I am of this. You are the most extraordinary person I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that stopping to help David that morning was the best decision you ever made." He opened the box. The ring inside was elegant and simple, a single diamond on a platinum band that caught the candlelight and threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of how we met, not because of what you did for David, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. Because you challenge me and inspire me and make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you. Marry me because we're better together than we ever were apart." Juliet looked at the ring, then at Marcus, then at the future stretching out before them. A future she'd never imagined that morning on the sidewalk when she'd made a choice that cost her everything. Except it hadn't cost her everything. It had cost her a job she'd outgrown, a life that was too small for who she was becoming, a safe path that would never have led her here. "Yes," she said, and she was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes. Absolutely yes." Marcus slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then he was around the table pulling her up into a kiss while the other diners applauded. When they finally sat back down, both grinning like fools, Juliet looked at the ring on her hand and felt the weight of everything that had brought her to this moment. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "That morning when I found David, I was so focused on my meeting, on my promotion, on my carefully planned career trajectory. If someone had told me that stopping to help him would cost me my job, my apartment, my entire life as I knew it, I honestly don't know if I would have stopped." "But you did stop," Marcus pointed out. "I did, and for weeks afterward, I regretted it. I lay awake at night wondering if I'd made the worst mistake of my life." She twisted the ring gently, watching it catch the light. "But Marcus, if I hadn't stopped, if I'd walked past him and made it to that meeting and gotten that promotion, I would never have met you. I would never have discovered what I was actually capable of. I would have spent the rest of my life in a job that was making me smaller, working for people who valued efficiency over humanity." She looked up at him, her vision blurry with happy tears. "So no, I don't regret it anymore. That moment on the sidewalk was the worst thing and the best thing that ever happened to me. It broke my life wide open, and everything beautiful came pouring in through the cracks." They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. David was the ring bearer, carrying the bands with exaggerated solemnity that made everyone smile. Claire was there, sitting with Juliet's parents, all of them wiping away tears. Sarah was the maid of honor, still occasionally looking at Juliet like she couldn't quite believe this fairy tale was real. But it was real. All of it. The pain and the loss and the fear had been real. And so was this. The love, the joy, the sense of finally being exactly where she was meant to be. As Juliet stood at the altar, holding Marcus's hands while the officiant spoke about commitment and partnership and choosing each other every day, she thought about that morning on the sidewalk. About the choice between ambition and compassion, between the life she'd planned and the person she wanted to be. She'd chosen compassion. She'd chosen to stop, to help, to sacrifice her own plans for a stranger's son. And in return, the universe, or fate, or blind luck, or whatever force governs these impossible coincidences, had given her everything she never knew she needed. Marcus squeezed her hands, and she squeezed back, anchoring herself in this moment. The officiant was asking if she took this man to be her husband, and Juliet said, "I do," with her whole heart, meaning it more than she'd ever meant anything. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in applause. David whooped loudly, making everyone laugh. And as Marcus pulled her close, whispering, "I love you," against her ear, Juliet realized something profound. She had been fired for saving a life. But in doing so, she'd saved her own. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is the best thing in disguise. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted makes room for everything you actually need. Sometimes the detour is the destination. And sometimes, in the wreckage of your broken plans, you find something infinitely better than anything you could have built according to the blueprint. Juliet had found her person, her purpose, and her peace. Not despite that terrible morning, but because of it. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, husband and wife, Juliet caught Sarah's eye and smiled. Her friend was still crying, mascara running, but she was grinning too. "Best plot twist ever," Sarah mouthed. And Juliet, thinking of everything, the sidewalk, the hospital, the firing, the fear, and every impossible thing that came after, could only agree. The end was really just the beginning, and it was more beautiful than any story she could have written for herself. If you loved this story, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Bye.